I've started this 6 times. Each time I get to the same place and my hands do this thing. They go still, the way they went still that morning, and I have to set everything down and wait. There is a sentence I have been carrying for 19 years. It lives behind my sternum, low and heavy, like a stone I swallowed that never dissolved. It is not about my wedding night. Everyone assumes it is about the wedding night. It is about what happened at 5:30 the next morning, when I stood in a cold room and tried to pin myself into my dress, and my hands would not stop shaking. I have never said this sentence where anyone could hear it. I am going to try. I stepped back just now. I felt the sentence rising and I needed air before I go closer. So let me breathe here for a moment. My name is Emma, and this is Emma the Amish Soul, a place where the things we were never given words for can finally be spoken. If you want to be here when I say it, subscribe. If staying with someone while she finds her language matters to you, stay. If you want to keep this space open, where the unspeakable things get said quietly and no one is rushed, you can join as a member or leave a super chat. Is there a sentence you have carried so long it feels like part of your breathing? I'm going back in. The sentence is closer now. In the world I come from, a woman's morning begins before the sun touches the fields. I do not mean this poetically. I mean that at 4:30, sometimes 4, you hear the first sounds: a stove door opening, the creak of a floorboard under bare feet, the soft iron clang of a kettle being set down. The kitchen is the center of an Amish woman's life, not her bedroom, not her prayers, though she prays. The kitchen. It is where her hands prove what she is worth, where her mother proved it before her, where her grandmother proved it before that. You are measured by what the morning finds you doing. You are measured by whether you are already standing when the rest of the house wakes. I loved that kitchen. I need you to know that before I say anything else. The morning after an Amish wedding is not private. In my community, the couple spent the first night in the bride's parents' home, and the next morning you rose early, earlier than usual if that was possible, and you helped. You cleaned, you carried benches, you washed dishes from a meal that had fed 300 people. Your mother-in-law was already working when you came downstairs. Your own mother was beside her. The women moved through the kitchen with a rhythm so practiced it was almost music, and you were expected to step into that rhythm without hesitation, without comment, as though nothing had changed between yesterday and today. As though the girl who had walked into that bedroom the night before and the woman who walked out of it the next morning were the same person. That was the expectation. That was the design. I was 20 years old. I had been taught to bake bread, to sew a dress from a pattern I could trace with my eyes closed, to butcher a chicken, to can tomatoes, to keep a garden that would feed a family through February. I had not been taught what my own body was. I do not mean I had not been taught about intimacy, though I had not really, not in any way that resembled preparation. I mean something deeper. My body was a thing I dressed and fed and moved through chores. It had no inner life that anyone acknowledged. There was no language for sensation, for want, for the difference between comfort and discomfort in your own skin. The subject had no shape. It was not forbidden the way a rule is forbidden. It was absent the way a color you have never seen is absent. You cannot name what you do not know exists. The wedding day comes back to me in pieces, not in order. The weight of standing for 3 hours on a backless bench. The hymn, the low bleed, that seemed to last longer than any hymn had ever lasted, and my feet going numb inside my shoes. The meal I could not eat because my stomach had closed like a fist. The faces of married women across the table, their expressions steady and unreadable, and me searching those faces for anything, a signal, a warning, a softness that might have been recognition. I found nothing. Or I found what I now understand was the same composure I would learn to wear. The last moment I was alone was in a small room off the kitchen, a pantry really, where I stood for maybe 40 seconds and pressed my palms against the cool wall and breathed. Then someone called my name. The night has its own weight. I have said that. But that is not the sentence I am trying to say. The wedding night is not the sentence. I need you to stay with me past it. I was going to describe the morning here. I had it planned. The light, the cold floor, the sounds from the kitchen below me, the way I woke and for 3 seconds did not remember what had changed. I was going to walk you into that room. But I keep starting that paragraph and my chest does this thing, this tightening, and I realize I have not built enough of the frame yet. The sentence I need to say does not make sense without understanding what I did not have. What no one gave me. Not the facts of the body, though those were missing too, but the permission to have a reaction, to feel something and be allowed to name it. I was given no vocabulary for the distance between who I was when I fell asleep and who I was expected to be when I opened my eyes. I need to come at this differently. Let me tell you about the silence first. My mother was a good woman. I will say that as many times as I need to because the sentence I am circling is not about blame and I will not let it become that. My mother was a good woman who taught me to make shoe-fly pie and to hem a dress so the stitches were invisible and to pray when I was frightened. She did not teach me about my body because her mother had not taught her and her mother's mother had not taught her mother. It was inherited silence. It moved through the women in my family the way a quilt pattern moves, handed down, replicated, each of us stitching it without ever stepping back far enough to see what the whole thing looked like. My mother survived her own first morning as a wife. I know this because she is a woman, and she was once 20, and she walked into that same kitchen. She survived it by never looking at it directly. She gave me what she had. The silence was not cruelty. It was the only thing she had been given, and she passed it on faithfully, the way she passed on everything. There was a morning, years after my own wedding, maybe 5 years, maybe 6, when my mother sat across from me at the kitchen table in her house. We were shelling peas. The light was coming through the window the way it does in late summer, heavy and gold, and I watched her hands working and I thought, she knows. She knows what that first morning was. I watched her mouth open. I saw the words arrange themselves. I could almost see them, the shape of a sentence forming behind her lips. And then her mouth closed. She looked down at the peas. She said something about the weather, about whether the rain would hold. And the sentence, whatever her version of the sentence was, went back into the place where she had been keeping it for 30 years. I sat there with my hands in the peas, and I understood that I would carry mine just as long if I did not find a way to say it somewhere, to someone, in a room where the silence could not swallow it. I am in the room now. I am going to stay in it this time. The floor is cold, not cool, cold. The kind of cold that comes up through wide pine boards in a house where the stove has been burning all night in the kitchen below, but the heat has not risen to the second floor. November. The light through the window is gray and thin. There are no curtains. There is a hook on the back of the door where my dress hangs, and beside it the cape and apron folded on a chair. My shoes are on the floor where I stepped out of them. The sounds from below are already steady. A stove door, a voice, the particular scrape of a cast iron pan being moved across a burner. My mother-in-law is already working. The morning is already in motion. I am lying still, and I am aware of my body the way you become aware of a room after the furniture has been rearranged in the dark. Everything is where it was, and nothing is where it was. I sit up. I put my feet on the cold floor. Beside me, he is still sleeping, his breathing slow, his face young, his hands open on the quilt. I want to say something about him here because the sentence I am approaching is not about him. He was gentle. He was as unprepared as I was, as silent about his own body as I had been about mine. We had been two people standing on opposite sides of a closed door, and the night had opened it, and neither of us had known what was on the other side. I looked at him sleeping, and I felt something I did not have a word for, a tenderness and a distance, both at once, as though I were looking at him from very far away while sitting right beside him. I touched his shoulder. I do not know why. Maybe because I needed to confirm that one of us was still recognizable. He was. He looked exactly like himself. I was the one who had changed. I stand and I reach for the dress. This is the part. This is where the sentence lives. I need to go slowly here. An Amish woman does not simply put on a dress. She constructs herself. The dress goes on first, plain, dark, familiar. I had sewn this one myself. My hands knew every seam. Then the cape, a triangular piece of fabric that pins across the chest. Then the apron, tied at the waist and pinned at the bodice. The pins, straight pins, thin as eyelashes, sharp enough to draw blood if your hands are not steady. I had pinned myself into my clothes every morning since I was old enough to dress without my mother's help. My hands knew this the way they knew breathing. But that morning my fingers were trembling. Not shaking, trembling, a finer thing, a vibration that started somewhere in my chest and traveled down my arms and into my fingertips. I pushed a pin through the fabric and it went into my finger instead. A small bead of blood rose on the pad of my index finger and I stood there looking at it. I could not move. Not because of pain. Because the blood was the only true thing in that room. The dress was a costume. The wife was a costume. The morning was a script I had been cast in overnight without audition. But the blood, that was mine. That was real. I pinned the apron. I set the prayer cap on my head. I walked to the small mirror on the wall, not a vanity mirror, just a small square of glass nailed above a washstand. I looked. I want to say I didn't recognize myself. That's what people say. That's the easy version, but it was worse than that. I recognized exactly who I was looking at. She was the woman they had been building for 20 years. Every lesson, every silence, every averted gaze when the body came too close to language. She was the wife, the morning woman, the one who goes downstairs and works and does not mention what the night asked of her. I recognized her completely. She was flawless. She was already assembled, already pinned into place, already looking back at me with steady eyes and a closed mouth. I recognized her. I just could not find the girl who had been standing in this same body 24 hours ago. She was gone. Not hiding. Gone. The way a sound is gone after it stops. You can remember that it existed, but you cannot find it in the room. I walked down the stairs. The kitchen opened beneath me, warm, bright, full of women. My mother-in-law looked up from the stove. An aunt was drying dishes. My own mother was there, her hands already moving, her face already composed. Gut Marie, someone said. Good morning. And someone handed me a bowl of potatoes and a peeling knife. I took them. My hands began to move. The peel curled off in long ribbons the way it always had, and the women around me worked in their steady rhythm, and no one looked at me differently. No one paused. No one searched my face. No one said, "Are you still in there?" Because this was the morning working exactly as it was supposed to. The bride becomes the wife. The wife enters the kitchen. The kitchen receives her. I stood in that warm room full of women who loved me, and I peeled potatoes and I felt myself disappear. Not dramatically, not with grief I could name, but the way fog lifts off a field. Slowly, silently. without anyone watching it go. I woke up someone I didn't recognize, and no one noticed, because she was exactly who they expected. That is the sentence. I have carried it for 19 years. I carried it while I peeled those potatoes and every morning after. I carried it through the birth of my children and the leaving of my community and the slow, bewildering process of building a life where words exist for things that were once shapeless. A therapist gave me a word for it years later: depersonalization. She said it gently, the way you hand someone a photograph of a place they have described but never seen. She said that what I experienced that morning, the watching of myself from a great distance, the feeling of performing a life rather than living it, had a name. That it was not a failing. That it was what happens to a mind when it is asked to cross a vast distance overnight with no bridge and no map and no acknowledgement that the crossing is even taking place. I was not broken that morning. The morning was working exactly as it was designed. And that is what took me the longest to say. That the people I love built something that required me to vanish, and they did not know they were building it, and it worked. I do not tell this story to make that world smaller. The kitchen was real. The love in it was real. The hymns were real, and the quilts, and the way my mother's hands moved through dough like she was praying with her fingers. I loved that world. I love the women in it still. What I grieve is not the world, but the silence inside it. The way it moved through us, mother to daughter, closing every mouth that might have said, "The first morning is hard. The first morning will ask you to become someone else. And you deserve to be told that before it happens, not after, not never." I grieve that my mother carried this same sentence and could not give it to me, and that her mother carried it before her, and that somewhere in the long line of women I come from, the first one who swallowed it instead of speaking it did so because she thought that was love. Maybe it was. Maybe silence was the only form of love she had. If you woke up one morning inside a life that fit you like a dress someone else had sewn, if you pinned yourself together and walked into a room and performed a woman you did not recognize, while the girl you had been dissolved without ceremony, if there is a sentence living behind your sternum, heavy and warm, that you have been breathing around for years because no one ever told you it was sayable, I am not going to tell you it gets easier. I am going to tell you it gets said. That the sentence exists outside of you. That other women have carried it in other kitchens, in other silence cultures, in other cold rooms where they stood with a pin in their hand and blood on their finger and wondered where they had gone. You are not alone. I see you. I see you the way I wish someone had seen me that morning. Not as the wife, not as the woman who walked downstairs and picked up the knife, but as the girl who was still in there, who needed one person to look at her face and say, "I know you are carrying something. I know the morning is asking you to disappear. You do not have to." The hardest part of becoming a wife was not what the night asked of my body. It was what the morning asked of myself. To stand up, pin myself together, walk downstairs, and let the woman I had been disappear without anyone saying goodbye to her. Not even me.